You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. I am so lucky to be here with Roberto Perez Rivero, who is on tour of the U.S. to promote the upcoming IPC 11 in Cuba. Thank you so much for joining me today, Roberto.
You're welcome. Thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do in Cuba.
I'm really excited to learn more, and I think we should just get started with, I did some research about you online and found out about your great work at the Antonio Nunez Jimenez Foundation for Nature and Humanity. Can you tell our listeners what that foundation is and what you do there?
Antonio Nunez Jimenez was a professor, an intellectual that have a great influence on Cuban scientific, cultural, and public life. He's considered for some people the first discoverer of Cuba because he started the work of the Cuban Spelunking or Caving National Society when he was only 18 years and did some of the most important expeditions and early research on Cuban mountains and ecosystems and places, combining archaeology, combining geography, combining history. And for that, he started to reflect like what was really happening in Cuban countryside. So for some people, that was not a good thing to do. So he has some trouble on his geography book that was totally burnt by Batista. Eventually, being a professor of the Central University of Las Villas, he joined the Rebel Army, the Che Guevara column, and finished as a captain. But after that, being one, in my opinion, of the most prepared persons in the revolutionary government, he held important responsibilities as director of the Cuban Institute of the National Institute of the Agrarian Reform. He was for 10 years the president of the Academy of Sciences that acted as the Ministry of Environment of Cuba between 1962 and 1972, ambassador in Peru, vice minister of culture, among other things like. So he was like one of the persons that really pushed further the environmental part of the revolution and really was influencing some of the other people that they were more into social dignities, developing the country in a way that important natural places of Cuba, of Viñales, the Zapata Swamp, Sierra Maestra, Toa River, and other places were preserved and used for an ecotourism. He retired from public life like around the 80s and started in the work was the foundation. So he donated the backyard of his house and all his legacy books and library to the foundation. And the foundation started to work as a non-for-profit in 1994 in April. The Permaculture group, which I happen to be, that was separate merged with the foundation in November of 1995. And this really helped us to warp the work on permaculture in Cuba, because before of that we were a couple of Australians and 5 Cuban people with a little office and trying to do things, but we were very limited. And I think that I will never forget, I've been working for the foundation for 17 years now. Like they really helped that are personally from Nunez Jimenez and second from the whole group. That really allowed us to reorganize the work and to do the work that we do on environmental issues from a community-based point of view and from also with an important remarks on arts. The foundation have been like a center and a very highly considered organization on environmental issues, but community-based at the same time.
That's wonderful. Can you tell our listeners about what you do there?
Yeah. What we try to do now from my program is to try to extend the permaculture and community development from an educational point of view. So we work a lot, I work a lot with school programs, with communities that are in very remote areas, in national parks. I try to influence in the environmental education. We try to tap in the potential of these students in the university so they can just come to the community and do things. And anywhere that there is some process of training and capacity building in Cuba, like we are doing things like that. So that is really, really, it's something that I will do for free. Maybe my salary is not very high, but I feel very, very happy to what we do. I spend 35% of my time teaching permaculture. I do a lot of like work in Cuban schools, training teachers. We go also a lot to like key protected areas of Cuba to study the ecosystems and the people's impacts. We try to call for national roundtable discussions on sustainable choices for different industries or problems or saving a watershed, stop a reservoir building or a dam and things like that. So it's very, very diverse. It keeps me on the move a lot.
Sounds exciting and very necessary work. Now, in the early 90s, Cuba experienced an almost overnight economic collapse, what is called the special period. And for those who don't know, maybe tell us what happened and what were the causes of that.
Basically, it was a political consequence rather than natural. The end of the Cold War, I don't think that there was any winner, but I can tell you that one side of the Iron Curtain collapsed, crumbled. Okay, and we were in the side that crumbled, not geographically, but strategically speaking. So our trade was very, very entrenched with the East Bloc countries. Probably Vietnam and Cuba were the only ones that were in that deep degree of integration, not even China or not even other countries. So the way that everything was organized is that we were sending our commodities or plantation products, rum, cigars, cigarettes, coffee, bananas, citrus juice, sugar cane. And in exchange of that, they were sending the real food or the things that we needed or the things that a conventional type of agriculture, the inputs, fuel oil, parts, machinery, natural gas, prime materials, and even the technological parts so for our factories to work. When all of that was gone, and it was gone in a very, very fast moment, because even when some of the countries of the peripheral were collapsing, the Soviet Union was sustaining, and in 1991, goodbye Soviet Union. So that really, really deteriorates the situation supporting life in Cuba. Technically speaking, we start having blackouts. We didn't have like public transportation, reliable, and there was no food. So we were hungry. We have to walk a lot, and the situation in the heat, places like that, were highly, highly compromised. So all the programs of the country of building new houses, or like organizing different things, or develop new factories and things like that, they were halted. The GDP went down by 70%. Everybody was waiting, so that we collapse as well. That we beg for mercy. And I have to say that this was when, in that darkest hour, the blockade was reinforced, because it was not only nothing coming from the U.S. There were some other laws that make very, very difficult. I can tell you, you can check Torricelli law, Helms-Burton, transition to democracy in Cuba. Some of these laws really make the life of the Cubans even dramatically worse. Just to give you an idea in terms of food, because it's something that we really, really have very, very fresh in our mind, the intake of calories went down by half. The lack of vitamin B, lack of iron, lack of the basic things of life. So people were very skinny and they were very active and they have to use a bicycle. And so the situation deteriorates. I think that the worst years were 1994 and 1995. So it becomes like a big experiment. As a result of that, I'm not hiding the fact that, for example, in 1996, there was something called the rafters crisis, where 96,000 people, when the border was open, just took rafters and started to leave the country. And these people have to be put in the Guantanamo base, and they stay there for quite a few months, and then they came to U.S. or Australia or different countries. So for some people, the situation was desperate, and they didn't want to be in Cuba anymore. Some interpretations can be done, the policies and that, like to change the country, to privatize. And no, I think that it was just very hard life, and people wanted, for economical reasons, to improve the life and to find a better place to be and help their families sending them money. But that's my interpretation. I respect other ideas. So it was a very, very, very bad situation with food security crisis, with an energy crisis, and with the collapse of the life supporting systems in the country. Very, very bad years.
And how much of the food in Cuba before the special period was imported and exported?
That's the problem. Some people think that we were producing lots of food before, but what happens is that we were producing commodities, and with that we were buying food. So the data are clear that we were importing almost 70% of the food, especially all the lipids, most of the meats, big amount of rice, all the wheat, some of the beans and grains and things like that. So like a very, very important part of the calories was imported before, because yes, we would produce some, tubers and like some important amount of vegetables and that. But while we were good, we were producing sugar or coffee or rum or citrus and that, and all of that was sent. Like many other countries, it was a plantation agriculture. So that agriculture was not very, very good by producing or oriented to the food production. So right now, so it totally has to switch towards a production of food in local basis, and that means to produce what grows well in your climate with the resources that you have. Fortunately, we have plenty of land, but more of that land was heavily degraded by bad agricultural practices or covered on invasive species, or there were not enough people in the countryside to grow it. So we have to take that challenge and totally change that situation.
Now, the conventional agriculture, the more industrial that was happening at the time pre-special period, was there a fight during the special period for those people to hold on to the industrial ag, or was everything just people open to new things, or how did that transition happen? Here in the States, there's a lot of opposition to organic.
What happened in Cuba is like, even in your mind, you want to say, okay, I want this. This is a good way to produce. The situation became unsustainable because this type of agriculture is highly dependent of inputs. So when you don't have those inputs, or when you have very little of those inputs, the system collapses because the yields are very, very low. And then the loss that you get for pests and like when the transportation doesn't work like a clock and it takes more hours, your produce are perishable and they get spoiled. And so, rather like you won't get much to start, you will get a lot of loss by pests, and in your transportation you probably will lose another 20%. So the system is not very efficient because this system is based on the open energy. It's an open system that is based more on fossil fuels and in the transportation chains. The other thing that it's not only the fuel, it's that you need tires, you need lubricants, you need painting, you need parts. And even like when many of these things were mothballs and put into store, like in Greece and that, like to continue, the years have passed and and those parts never arrived because many of those models were not even built in their countries anymore. So at the end, All of that decayed in a way that it was not uh, reliable of working in that. And in the meantime, the other sort of agriculture came to improve the soil, to find some other sources of nutrients uh, based on like animal traction, human energy, smaller space with an intensive approach, more perennial crops, less annuals. It was a completely switch of mind. Of course, that there was a resistance in the beginning because even people that were trained in the university to do one thing, they were totally transformed because like they cannot use even like the interplanting distance between the bananas because it was totally different, or they cannot use like the very wide areas to let the tractors come in because you will be losing land growing. So these require, a change of setup of the mind and even a recycling of your agricultural science. So that's where the big switch to agroecology, which is the science behind the sustainable agriculture operations. When I say sustainable, it's something that can be sustained in time, but everyone knows that factory farming is not sustainable because it will destroy the soil and poison the water, and it is depending on something that we don't have. So maybe in the mind of some people, especially like the people that were in the Ministry of Agriculture on that, they really want, or they consider the other agriculture the progress, or they were desperate to get yields on the short term because in the beginning, the situation was improving very, very slowly, but they couldn't. They couldn't get access to, and one of the things is like the big difference, is that to make a transition of that, you need time or money. So if you have less money, you need more time. If you have more money, you need more time. You need less time. We didn't have the time because people were starving, and we didn't have the money. So, like, I can tell you that the transition happened a lot quicker than many people. Even some of the permaculture people say, you need 12 years or you need 5 to clean the soils and bring back the life. I can tell you that after 3 to 4 years, that like the situation was very interesting. Things were happening there, and we were learning a lot. So this science was really, really changed the way that we produce food, and we had to do it locally. Bicycle distance, walking distance, horse cars distance. So it really, really totally switched the way of that. Some people will argue, no, that's not produce a lot, or that is not enough, and that. But what I can tell you, that transition of agriculture makes Cuba one of the very, very few countries where sustainable agriculture is majority, and factory farm, GMOs, and some other forms of whatever that's called is less than 20% of the surface of the arable land.
That's amazing. So really, Cuba offers a blueprint for us to look at, because here there's so much theorizing going on about peak oil and what's going to happen when we don't have the fuel that we need, and you've lived through it.
The bad thing is that we didn't have a choice. We had to do it. So we have
Quickly,
an ultimate driver. And I think that for most of the Cubans, they did the analysis. What is the price that I have to pay for giving access to the basic things that we want as a country: free access to education and health, to sports and the culture, relatively high life expectancy, very low maternity, very low mortality, infant mortality, and even lowest maternity mortality. The price is that I have to grow my own food. I'm gonna do it. And so people started to switch, and they started to take more control of the systems. Even I say that for even like for people, they become more independent from like the welfare state or the government in that way, because they knew what they have to do. to be more self-reliant. So even from that point of view, people were more independent of like the food supply system, or as ration cards or food imports and that, and people started to look more on what they can do on the community level, on their social tissue, and organize that. So I think that even just for that, it was something that it became very, very important. And this brought changes on the health, changes on like the way that people will see the things, relocalizations against globalization. But as I started, we had to do it. So I really admire the people that in other societies, when there is more abundance, they choose to do this, because maybe you ask the Cubans to say, okay, this is going backwards or something. Right now it's another philosophy, no? It's like we see the implications of more than 20 years of a different way of doing things, not as a temporary thing, not as a like a way to resist and to preserve the social project, but also as a switch of mind. But I really, really admire the people that they choose to do it, and there are so many temptations that I didn't have when I was growing there and doing that. Like I really think that this is something of the complement. So this I should be I think that is the difference, but that is something that is being used for some other skeptical people to say, no, Cuba cannot be an example, cannot be like a model or a direction, because it's very particular and they have to. And then now if they go back, or if the embargo blockade is lifted, they very quickly go back. Well, maybe, but nobody can erase those 25 years of like a very different way of doing things that brought, increasing the surface of forests, that really bring down our ecological footprint very low, that really decrease the per capita of emissions of Cubans, and that really make a country, as some people say, more sustainable. I know so it's the only sustainable, maybe that's too much, but lot more sustainable than probably any other moment after the arrival of the Spanish to the country.
So some of the many benefits that people experienced from this, even though it was a very hard time, it sounds like there were benefits as far as people's health. And I'm curious, during this special period, was your healthcare, I know that Cuba has had free healthcare for quite a while, was your healthcare and other social services cut because of these challenges?
But by no means, it was affected by the quality of the service, in the terms in that there was no access to basic hospital products and medicines, pills, and things like that. Especially because, for two reasons: we didn't have enough money to buy it, and second, that the embargo prevented those things in the early years. After that, there were some exemptions, but still, we see the problem of that. So it kept being free, and it was more based on doctors, like in the human power, because we have like lots of doctors, or family doctors, people that were in your block. It did a lot of influence on prevention, and it's not, for example, I can put you on the example that when there was a problem in the nutrition, rather than come up with like this heavy vitamin centrum, broad aspect, and that, there was a study to know what we really need. It was iron, it was vitamin B12, B2, and B6. So the Cuban polyvid just have what we need, not everything. So it have to become like a system that have to be very tweaked to the maximum to make it possible, to face like the shortage of energy and systems. There were very, very hard years. There were more doctors than prescriptions. And so even alternative solutions have to be found on health. First, I can tell you that hospitals started to receive generators so they can give service even in the middle of the blackout in the neighborhood. I can tell you that the country started to work trying to produce the generics, the basic generic medicines that we need for the country, because if we cannot buy outside, it was important to produce our own. It's an example that was later followed by India, by Brazil. So we tried to make our own vaccines and to make different things that they were totally suited to the problems that we have it, and that makes some companies very angry as well. But that was something, and I think that the big change will be the word I'm going to use is the recycling of the Cuban doctors. We recycle the agronomists, we recycle the doctors. So many like herbalists and traditional Eastern medicine doctors came from China, from Vietnam to retrain the Cuban doctors. And the whole system reintegrated to the agricultural system to produce plants that they have medical properties. So they were produced in the country and also elaborated in the country, dilutions and decoctions and that kind of thing. So this really made our health less westernized. So not only working on the symptoms, but working also on the causes, and also to use herbal remedies and plants and more natural preparations that will have more broad spectrum, not only to alleviate your disease, but also to make you feel better. And so this was something that it was doing by a relocalization. So that allowed also to recover a lot of traditional medicine from the Afro-Cuban priests, from like the Cantonese that were in the country, some other remedies that they were used on the war times and in the independence war against Spain, or so it really enriched the health in a way that it was not the typical operation. It makes it empowers the Cuban doctors that they just can come to desperate places like Haiti or the Pacific Islands of South America, or after a hurricane and earthquakes, and by simple measurements, they can reduce the epidemics or cholera or dengue fever and things like that. So we learned the hard way in Cuba, and then we have been learning what is happening in the other countries. The other benefits to the health were on people walk a lot, people did a lot of exercise, people do a lot of bicycle, and it was like, people were fit and skinny because the food was not a lot, but also they were strong, no? And so this is something, because we always need to take in account that one of the main positive impacts of this type of agriculture is that it makes people work and bend their backs and sweat and organize the other things. So when you combine like a different kind of medicine, free access, socialized, prevention oriented, with physical exercise and a better diet, like people were, receiving all of these benefit things. I'm not saying, oh, perfect, it was bad. There was no food. You take 4 hours to go to work. You have to wait for the bus for many places. People, sometimes they got angry. If you're driving a bicycle to a party, you get sweat. Your trousers get stained with the grease. You smell. I'm not saying that it was a very pleasant thing, because the Cubans, we share a lot of bad stories on that. For some Cubans, it can be a tragedy, and they just left the country, or they say, okay, these were terrible years, and they have tears on their eyes. I am not making a funny story here, okay? What I'm telling you, that in a critical time like that, there are many dimensions and multiple aspects to assess and evaluate. And that's what I'm telling you. I am not saying that it was, okay, because sustainability by force is something that is not in your mind, and you're stressed, okay? So as soon as people were, the transportation was a little bit better, they stopped taking the bicycles. And then no more bicycle paths. Or as soon as some people, they find a better job, maybe they stop the agriculture. So the process on when the crisis started, we touched the bottom and then we started to come a little bit up, especially by the end of the 90s and before 2004. There were some good years, especially worked by the tourism and local economy on that. Some people simply adopted another strategies, but most of the people, they kept doing things because they make sense. They were good for them. It's good for their economies, or they get such a recognition. So that's why, in my opinion, in those years, were like a concentration of quality in terms of agriculture, in terms of environmental management. So the quantity of people practicing decreased, but the impact on the society of the produce that the people that continue doing in almost the same surface was increased. So it stopped being an agriculture for surviving to become like a market gardening thing with very very high nutritional quality. It also started to bring jobs to people. People started to make 3 minimum wage per month on the agriculture. They get more social recognitions. People started to give like the role in the society that the farmer really deserves as a food provider, that it should be recognized that this person is working hard, taking risks, so we can eat a nice food. This and anyway, there will be quality and quantity fluctuations. It's not as massive as in the bad years because the situation changed. It's as still, in my opinion, a very important component of the Cuban society, and we can talk about more trees, more fruit trees, more food produced in the cities, that more food produced in the country than ever. A lot of people involved in healthy lifestyles, and a change of attitude towards consumption and towards different things, at least in terms of food and health. This is a modern world. We lack many technological gadgets and things like that. And young people, they're infatuated. Everyone wants iPhones and iPods and Androids and Blackberries. I am not talking about those things, but those things have a different treatment. So the access to the energy was, again, like people were educated and pushing to save and use as less as possible energy, to look into tap into multiple sources of energy, and eventually renewables are there, and they're becoming more and more the desire of the people. Solar water heaters, solar panels, micro hydro, biomass, different forms and different strategies that are considered in Cuba, even when we can get relatively cheap fossil fuels from our friends of Venezuela. So even having access to that sources, I think that the Cuban society was able to evolve to an attitude and values of the culture that make this society a lot less dependent on fossil fuels than most societies. This is combined with other regulations. You cannot buy a new car in the country. So there's some other regulations that they can have like different interpretations. And my point here is not to judge all of that. I'm an activist of sustainability, and I can tell you that regarding sustainability is a very interesting and innovative countries, and I never stop learning.
And you teach as well. And that brings us to, so the special period is happening. You're making kind of a transition, but through necessity, through emergency. And when did permaculture come to Cuba, and how did you discover it?
Permaculture arrived in Cuba in 1993. Reconstructing the case like before, because I was very, very young. I was 22 years. One of the architects of Cuba that was acquainted with the permaculture, especially movement in Europe, is more architecture than food production, in my opinion. Wrote to Bill Mollison in Australia, asking for help. Then the Permaculture Global Assistance Network were thinking on ways to put the permaculture in the Cuban scenery because it, it was the hot front, the hot spot for food sovereignty. Like Cubans were struggling and doing different, and permaculture had to be there. In 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 fact, there were like a couple of Australians that they happened to be lefties, and they happened to be linked to the unions that came to Cuba in the Australian Brigades of Solidarity in 1992 and 1993 that says, okay, these people need permaculture right away. They started to contact Cuban authorities, and I started to tell them about the permaculture. Sometimes, when you say yes, it's not yes, or maybe later, and that they happen to finally find this research institute on economical things that they were totally quantifying the amount of food that was reaching the Cubans, and they were really, really, really aware of the need of that sustainable techniques, and they signed a little agreement, so the OSIS will come to build a rooftop permaculture garden on the place. I happened to be squatting a computer there, a 386, to writing my thesis on biology. I was finishing, and this guy that signed an agreement asked me, do you know what permaculture is? I said, yes, but I didn't. I sort of lie. I went in my bicycle to the Ministry of Agriculture library. I found a booklet, and I saw this for the first time. Somebody or something. I know that other people's wrote before or after. I know that our ecology was available. When I was a biologist, I was considered that the agriculture was the enemy. Like they were poisoning the planet, killing the species, and we were always opposing to all of those things. And I saw somebody called Bill Mollison and David Holmgren that it was talking about producing food using food chain, ecological production, and rainforest, and these people were talking to me. And for the first time, I stopped being worried that I was gonna get a bug person that will know a lot about bugs and will protect the ecosystems, but especially in Cuba, that won't be doing enough for people, no? Because my heart was divided. The nature needs to be preserved, but the people needs also be empowered and help. Otherwise, they will destroy eventually the nature. And we have like very close examples in Haiti or Latin America when the environmental degradation warp in those hard times. So I was offered, do you want to work with the Australians? And I said, yes. I changed, rather than going to a lab or a biotech or to work in the zoo or become like a field biologist. My life dramatically changed. I was in the airport when the Australians came, and I started to grow with these small people, 5, 6 people, that in a very few months we not only built the garden, that it really helped us onto that, but also like we started the integration of the permaculture into like the broad system. The beautiful years came afterwards. We merged with the foundation. We partnered with the Urban Agriculture Department of Cuba, and we have been steadily growing the number of permits. But I think that the advantage that the permaculture have for a situation like this is that it joins the dots. It's not only about growing food, it's about water, energy, housing, the way that we face our relationship with the nature, the way that we leave some space for like a little bit of the forest, a little bit of the nature, and also joining the dots with in smart design ideas to make our life in the cities better. So that's why I think that for me, permaculture is a philosophy of life, and it's something that came in the right spot in my life, and I embrace it. And for me, empower me as a person because I can apply the permaculture principles in any different climate zone or situation of my life. And at the same time, I can use the permaculture as a tool for environmental education or for awareness why we have to preserve what is left of this beautiful legacy of biodiversity.
It sounds like permaculture came at the right time, not only for you, but also for Cuba.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that maybe before it will be too soon, or maybe afterwards it will be too late. But the thing is that the way that we did it, also we have to tropicalize and Cubanize the permaculture as well as other forms of agriculture, rather than make a Cuban Institute of Permaculture and isolate ourselves or try to fund the work with people paying for training in a country that nobody pays anything. So was not ethically coherent. So we have to do like a slower approach, mix, doing some sort of guerrilla and integrate ourselves in the partnerships with the environmental people, the agricultural people, the social justice people, the community development people. So in that way, we drank in many different sources, and our invisible structures were like a community movement of people that it was more important to spread the word and to apply maybe three principles than to have the perfect permaculture side, of to have like rich clients that will help us to pay. It's a different context. I am not saying that what happens in another places is wrong, but what I'm telling you is that I think that what have been slowed down a little bit the expansion of permaculture in like third world countries is exactly that there is a little bit of the contradiction, because it's seen as a high premium value or as a business individual plan. And so in that way, it would be very, very hard to work with the communities, with the First Nations, and they will be disempowered in their access. I know that there are now more and more formulas to overcome that, but we were in Cuba and we were in the 90s, so we naturally found this way of using the permaculture as something to make the life of the people better and to spread as free as possible. Or if we have to fundraise, then we try to subsidize that and make it available for people. So in that way, when the people from international cooperation that they normally don't like permaculture, when they saw what we have done in Cuba, they really like it and they started to support us. I know this is still very or dependent. We depend on foreign resources to do some of the things that we do. But I can tell you that these sources are to expand the training or for us to move to new provinces or new municipalities and to work with new groups. But the groups that they were already trained, they can easily continue working with us without us. Actually, they're better than us in some of the things that they do. So it's baby steps, but they're very solid baby steps that they don't go backwards, because these people now, it's part of their life, it's part of their culture. So what we need help is to extend that and to infect the bug of permaculture to as many people as possible. And it's up to them if they use 5 principles, if they use 1 principle, or if they say, maybe permaculture is not done for me. And when we ask them, what the permaculture brought you, because many of them, they were already growing food, and that's the thing that we have. It's like we don't depend on people paying us for training, so we can choose the cream of the cream, or the people that are potential promoters, or people that can be examples and that. And 4 or 5 years afterwards, we asked them, and Pamela Morgan from Australia was the one that tried to do that assessment a lot. Some people make very funny answers like, permaculture gave me finesse to work with the soil. I was brutish. I was like working very hard and fighting, and now I'm like a bullfighter. I'm just like harnessing those tap energy into work with that. Or people say it totally changed my life because I saw that I wasn't landless, because I have just a rooftop and a balcony, and to buy a new house in Cuba is different. But now I know that I can grow at least some of my food and improve my life. That was something. So we have these landless permaculture people that they do very creative forms of agriculture or animals. And after that, there were the people, what they do is ask for more, because once that you finish your PDC and you start to produce food, you say, what's the next step? And maybe it is a compost toilet. What's the next step? Preserve your vegetables or collect rainwater. What's the next step? Uh, to have like a different production. What's the next step? Renewable energy. So it's something that is adding layers of sustainability in your life system rather than making you like a barefoot farmer from sun to sun sweating and that, and then the people learn and the people join the dots, talk about climate change, talk about preparedness, talk about disaster relief, talk about risk analysis, and it's the people that at the same time they make them eligible to be working with the Ministry of Agriculture after because they're permits and they know how to do that, or to find better jobs, or to organize different programs, or to open a cafeteria, or to start like a small business, self-employment, and different things. So for me, it's empowerment of people. It's education, and it's also the idea to achieve convergence of people that they have pieces, slices of the cake, but they don't have the whole cake. And, and make them be able to join the dots and to work together. People that normally don't work together now are working together. So that's the value that I see of the permaculture. Maybe it's a term from 1978. It didn't went on fashion like sustainability that was gaining dust in 1972 reports of UN, and not many people can define sustainability properly. But we have to give credit to the pioneers in 1978 to talk about permanent agriculture, permanent culture, and to start tapping into the first energy of crisis. We have to give lots of credit to these pioneers in Australia, in US, in Europe, that started to capitalize a counterculture, a hippie movements, or people that knew that they wanted to be different, or sense to them that they were the weeds that colonized the system and became the first succession of the ecosystem. We can have a second wave or the second stage. Call us the shrubs, or like or little trees that are doing there. I consider myself like the second wave or third generation, that now the planet is in a lot more complex situation. There is climate change, there is this fossil fuel crazy addictions, but permaculture has a lot to say, and stop that we need to be considered marginalized and just like people that are doing things in a crazy way. Enough of that.
It's true. And speaking of convergence, which you mentioned earlier, can you tell us a bit about the opportunity that people will have in the upcoming IPC 11? And maybe just a couple of sentences about what the IPC is, and then tell us why you're so excited that it's happening in Cuba.
The International Permaculture Convergence is the world gathering of the permaculture community. So they have been other things that have been developing. Is now like every 2 years. The last one was in Jordan, before Malawi, before Brazil, before Croatia, and there was like another 5 that were in the early moments in different places as well. So just for some of the reasons that I have been talking to you in this interview, Cuba was chosen in 2011 to organize this one. So it's not something that we come up with. It's that we, thanks to the things that we have been developing in the country, as a sort of recognition of our achievements, were chosen by the community to celebrate one of the international gatherings. This will happen on November of this year, and we are inviting people to come because we really want to have like a really representative and like a very big convergence. In a convergence, what we will have is like different events. We will have a permaculture design course with an international all-star team for 2 days that can happen before the main events. You're open to come. We will have like an international conference, 3 days, with highlights on permaculture in islands, permaculture and climate change, and permaculture in cities. And why not talking about hurricane-proof permaculture systems. We will have like an urban tour just to show some of the urban systems in Havana. We will have the convergence itself, because the difference between the conference and the convergence is, and the conference you will have, or we will have keynote speakers, and we want a more academic approach because we want to open the permaculture into the big public and to infect the bug in like researchers and people that are policymakers and decision makers. Rather, the convergence is more like the grassroots. What do we do? Workshops, presentations, uh, assemblies to take decisions, regional meetings, brainstorms, ideas, what is going to happen next year, and all of those things. That will be 5 days in a beautiful international camping base, not tent type, like, with facilities. And then we will finish with 3 choices of rural tours, or going to other cities of Havana. For this group of system of events, it will be 2 weeks. So if you can come, please come. The idea of that is that there are ways for U.S. citizens to come directly and without breaking the laws of your government, because there are a couple of groups that they have license to provide travel service to the people interested to go. One group is Global Exchange, Eco Cuba Tours Global Exchange, and the other group is the NEAM Brigade. But as an individual, if you think that you can tap into classify as an academic or research person in some of these fields, you can apply individually and arrange your own trip to Cuba and register in the website.
Yeah, and the website kind of walks you through it on what to do. And what is the website for the IPC 11?
Okay, www.ipc11cuba.com. So it's bilingual. That will give you the information. There will be simultaneous translation. I don't have to tell you that lingua franca of permaculture is English for many, many reasons. I'm not arguing with that, but we try to give our little space with Spanish, but it will be very, very accessible for people that don't speak Spanish. It's not like a Spanish Latin American conference. It's a world conference. So for the sake of the good communications, it's happening. So you will have some of the big names, some of the innovative name, some of the people that have been doing this magnificent work. And we are also trying to bring delegates from poor countries. For that, we're fundraising here. That's my reason to be here. Or, getting bursaries or taking the prices, the cost to a minimum, in a way that they should be a true representations of the global permaculture movement. Not only people from rich countries coming to talk about how good they are going to help the poor people in the South. And for that, please come, because every person that comes to Cuba helps to make the organization of the event safer, because we have a little bit more money. Or if you can donate, or if you can come to one of our talks, or please help to make this possible and better. We know it's going to happen because we have been working hard for 2 years, but if you help, it's going to be better, it's going to be bigger, and it's going to be nicer. And once again, if we want to make the permaculture sexy and beautiful and funny, we're going to start by hosting people in Cuba with our culture, with our dancing, with our rum, with our produce, in a way that it will be an unforgettable experience for those that come.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. And do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I have to tell you that it's been like a very, very tight schedule. I have been visiting places that I had never been. I have to say that I want to thank to Wes and the people from Santa Barbara that organized this tour. I have to say to some other organizations that make this trip possible. This is like a modest effort and a way to show that there is always hope in people to people, face-to-face relationship, that we can overcome the difficulties between our governments in a way that At the end, we're all humans, and if we have common things like permaculture or a devotion for sustainability, why cannot we work together? I believe in the future. I'm an optimistic person, so optimistic that I have a little kid. I decided to 8 months old kid. I know that it can be very bad in the next years, but I know that if we apply to the best of the human conditions of being able to really adapt to places rather than accumulate wealth, destroying everything else, accumulating money, or everything based on like a very unreal and irrespectful of nature approach. I think that we can achieve a different way of life, and I'm very optimistic on that because I've seen the worst. I know how bad it can get, and I see the way out as well. So I really, really feel optimistic but objective. So, in the same way that there will be bigger, very big challenges in the planet in the next years to come, there will be problems, there will be some disasters, but I think that we have what it takes as humans. I hope that we use it. At least in my community, we are using it. And that's what it counts.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening. Our first documentary, The Soil Solution, is now available at sustainableworldmedia.com. The Soil Solution is a 28-minute documentary film that explores the potential that healthy soil may hold in reversing climate change.